What happens when Hollywood royalty collides with British royalty in front of the entire world? You get a moment so explosive, so humiliating, that it sends shockwaves through palaces, tabloids, and social media feeds across the globe. Imagine sitting in the audience of one of the world's most prestigious summits, where leaders, thinkers, and celebrities gather to shape global conversations. And then, without warning, a legendary actress takes the stage and doesn't just speak. She detonates a cultural bomb. Goldie Hawn, beloved Hollywood icon, did exactly that. And her target? None other than Prince Harry. But here's the twist. She didn't just make a passing remark. She didn't just poke fun. She branded him with a label so damning, so humiliating, that it instantly became the headline of the night: Meghan Markle's puppet. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now stop and think about that for a second. A puppet. Controlled. Manipulated. Strings pulled not by his father, not by his brother, but by his own wife. Isn't that the exact narrative Harry has fought so desperately to shake off for years? That he's no longer his own man? That every move he makes, every word he utters, is choreographed by Meghan Markle herself? So why did Goldie Hawn say it here, in this moment, at the 2025 Concordia Summit? And why did it sting so much that Harry, usually practiced in public appearances, looked as if the floor had fallen out from beneath him? The truth is, this was not a random insult. This was not an accident. This was years of perception, years of whispers, years of media narratives crashing into reality on the global stage. But to truly understand why this moment matters, we need to peel back the layers. Because this isn't just about a celebrity humiliating a prince. This is about the collision of two worlds: Hollywood's unapologetic honesty and the monarchy's obsession with image. It's about a cultural shift where icons from outside the palace walls feel empowered to call out royalty without fear. And most of all, it's about Harry himself, the man who once promised to redefine royal duty but is now, in the eyes of many, defined by his dependence on Meghan. Let's be clear. Goldie Hawn didn't create the perception. She simply voiced what millions have been whispering. The shock wasn't in her words. It was in the undeniable truth they carried. And that is exactly why the moment went viral. But let's rewind. Who exactly is Goldie Hawn in this context? Why does her voice matter? She's not British. She's not royal. She's not even part of Harry and Meghan's circle. Yet, her reputation as a fearless, no-nonsense Hollywood veteran gave her the authority to say what others wouldn't dare. For decades, Goldie has been seen as bubbly, quirky, and lighthearted. But underneath that laughter lies sharp observation and blunt honesty. She has survived Hollywood politics, personal scandals, and decades in the spotlight without ever losing her voice. When Goldie speaks, people listen. Now, contrast that with Harry, the boy who once charmed the world as the cheeky, rebellious prince, the soldier who fought on the front lines, the young man who walked behind his mother's coffin, instantly cemented in global memory as a tragic figure. That Harry was seen as independent, relatable, even heroic. But fast forward to today, and what do we see? A man accused of whining, cashing in on his family's secrets, and, yes, playing second fiddle to Meghan. The juxtaposition is brutal. On one side, a Hollywood star who built her identity by standing tall, defining herself. On the other, a prince who seems unable to escape the shadow of his wife. So when Goldie used the word puppet, it didn't come across as comedy. It came across as an unfiltered truth bomb. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The Concordia Summit isn't just another red carpet event or talk show. This is a stage for leaders and changemakers. Presidents, CEOs, activists, and thinkers. Harry himself has spoken at events like these before, using his platform to discuss mental health, climate change, and social justice. He sees himself as a thought leader now, someone who deserves to be taken seriously. And yet, in one single sentence, Goldie stripped all of that away and reduced him to a punchline. Can you imagine the sting of that? Standing in a room where global power players gather, where reputations are built and broken, and hearing yourself mocked as little more than a puppet? The humiliation is almost cinematic. And yet, it wasn't fiction. It was real. It happened. Now, let me ask you directly. What would hurt more? Being insulted by your enemies, or being laughed at by people who used to respect you? Because that's what Harry faced that night. It wasn't just the insult. It was the ripple effect. The gasps, the smirks, the sideways glances, the unspoken message that everyone in the room was now questioning his independence, his credibility, his very manhood. And here's the kicker. Meghan wasn't even there. She didn't have to be. Her presence loomed over the entire room, invisible yet undeniable. Every person who heard Goldie's words instantly pictured Meghan pulling the strings, orchestrating Harry's every move. Goldie didn't just call Harry out. She called Meghan out by proxy. That's what made it nuclear. Think about it. For years, critics have accused Meghan of scripting Harry's life, from the Oprah interview to their Netflix docuseries, from his book Spare to every public statement he's made. Harry has denied it, of course, but in one fell swoop, Goldie made that denial crumble. And she did it in front of the very audience Harry wanted to impress. But why now? Why at this summit? Was it a slip of the tongue? Or was it deliberate? That's the mystery we're going to unpack. Because the truth is, Goldie's comment didn't happen in a vacuum. It came at a time when Harry's reputation is already hanging by a thread. His relationships with his family fractured. His public image battered. His relevance questioned. And Goldie's words weren't just a jab at him. They were a mirror, reflecting back the uncomfortable truth that even his allies whisper behind closed doors. That he is no longer the man the world once admired. That he is, indeed, controlled. But here's the twist that makes this story even more gripping. Goldie Hawn didn't just walk off stage and leave the comment hanging. No, she doubled down, weaving her remark into a broader critique of authenticity, independence, and leadership. She didn't just call Harry a puppet. She asked the question, what does it mean to lead? To inspire? To stand on your own? In doing so, she turned a personal insult into a global talking point. And that's where the Real story begins. Because what happened after those words left her mouth would ignite a firestorm that neither Harry nor Meghan could extinguish. The laughter, the whispers, the headlines, it was only the beginning. So buckle up. Because if you think the insult was shocking, wait until you see how Harry reacted, how the audience responded, and how this one moment reshaped the narrative of a prince who once wanted to change the monarchy, but now finds himself mocked on the world stage. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The stage was set. The lights, the banners, the polished podium, all gleaming with the prestige that only an event like the Concordia Summit could command. This wasn't a Hollywood gala. It wasn't a royal procession. It was something different. A gathering where world leaders, activists, and innovators collide under one roof to discuss global issues. Climate change, human rights, economic stability, the future of democracy. It's the kind of stage where words matter more than appearances, where reputations are either strengthened or destroyed with a single speech. And on this stage, sitting among presidents, CEOs, and cultural icons, was Prince Harry. Let's pause for a moment. Picture it. The audience, a mix of polished diplomats in tailored suits, philanthropists in carefully chosen designer outfits, and journalists itching to catch a headline-worthy moment. Cameras were everywhere, poised to broadcast the event to millions. The Concordia Summit wasn't just another conference. It was an institution, a place where credibility was currency. And Harry, once a British prince with automatic prestige, was here to prove that he deserved to sit among them as an equal. But here's the irony. For all his attempts to distance himself from the royal family, Harry brought his royal baggage everywhere he went. The whispers followed him into that summit hall. The questions, the doubts. Was he here as Prince Harry, the independent leader? Or was he here as Meghan Markle's shadow, the man who gave up everything for her and never looked back? From the moment he walked into the venue, the energy shifted. People noticed. Some stood politely, shaking his hand with diplomatic smiles. Others looked on with curiosity, sizing him up like a specimen under glass. The younger attendees whispered and took photos discreetly, as if they were spotting an endangered species. Harry's face, familiar yet weathered, carried the weight of years of media scrutiny. His suit was sharp, his stride confident, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease, as though he knew he was walking into a lion's den. And maybe he was, because sitting in the wings, preparing to take the stage, was Goldie Hawn. Now think about that collision for a moment. Goldie, Hollywood's golden girl, the actress who defined entire generations of comedy and charm. Her career wasn't built on titles or inheritance, but on talent, grit, and an uncanny ability to win over audiences with authenticity. She didn't inherit a platform. She earned it. She didn't cling to her family name. She made her own. And that's exactly what made this setting so dangerous for Harry. The summit wasn't about royal lineage. It wasn't about heritage. It was about substance, about what you bring to the table. And in a room full of global power players, the whispers were already starting. What does Harry really bring? Here's the thing about stages like this. They magnify truth. They strip away the polish. A king might look powerful in a palace, but under the spotlight of a summit, power is measured by words, ideas, and conviction. Harry had been on this kind of stage before, delivering speeches about mental health and social justice. He knew the drill, but this time was different. This time, the credibility gap was wider than ever. Because outside those doors, the world was already laughing. The tabloids painted him as Meghan's lapdog. Commentators dismissed him as bitter and irrelevant. Even in America, where he once hoped to reinvent himself, the late-night shows had turned him into a running joke. And now, sitting in this high-stakes environment, he carried all of that with him. Every glance, every smile, every handshake seemed to remind him of the narrative he couldn't escape. The stage itself was immaculate. Dark blue backdrops, golden lighting accents, a podium flanked by flags from around the world. The Concordia logo gleamed across the giant screens. It wasn't designed for theatrics, but for gravitas. Speakers stood at the podium, framed by grandeur but judged by substance. As the event unfolded, the crowd politely applauded dignitaries delivering carefully rehearsed speeches. There were nods of approval, murmurs of interest. But the room wasn't buzzing yet. The energy was steady, professional, until the moment Goldie Hawn walked up to the podium. You could feel the shift immediately. A ripple of excitement ran through the audience. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a CEO. She wasn't an academic. She was Goldie Hawn, unexpected, unpredictable, and unfiltered. People straightened in their seats. Cameras zoomed in closer. Journalists lifted their pens with anticipation. And that's when the tension really thickened. Because Harry was in the room. And everyone knew it. It's almost cinematic when you think about it. A Hollywood starlet turned legend standing at the microphone. A disgraced prince sitting in the audience, trying not to flinch under the spotlight. The silence that falls right before something unforgettable is about to be said. Here's the truth. Goldie Hawn didn't have to say anything shocking. Her presence alone was enough to overshadow Harry. But that night, she decided to go further. Much further. And before she ever uttered the word puppet, she built the atmosphere to ensure that when she did, it would land like a thunderclap. Let's break down the moment. She started light, disarming the crowd with her trademark wit. A joke here, a quip there. The audience laughed, warmed to her instantly. But then, seamlessly, she shifted gears. Her voice grew sharper, her words more deliberate. She began talking about authenticity, leadership, and the courage to stand alone. It was eloquent, yes, but it was also loaded. Because as she spoke, all eyes in the room drifted, consciously or unconsciously, to Prince Harry. The implication hung in the air like static electricity. And Harry knew it. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He leaned forward slightly, as if bracing himself for a storm he could already feel approaching. And then it happened. Goldie Hawn, with the same smile that had charmed audiences for decades, delivered the line that would dominate headlines around the world. She called Harry a puppet. Meghan Markle's puppet. The word cut through the air like a blade. The audience gasped. Some chuckled nervously. Others froze, unsure of how to react. But one thing was undeniable. The atmosphere in the room shifted from polite engagement to stunned disbelief. For a split second, time seemed to stop. Harry's face flushed. His hands clenched on his lap. Every camera in the room turned toward him, catching his reaction, magnifying his humiliation. And Goldie? She didn't flinch. She didn't backpedal. She leaned into the moment, letting the weight of her words hang over the audience. She didn't just make a remark. She branded him, right there, in front of the world. Think about the irony here. A prince, raised in palaces, educated in the world's best institutions, decorated for his military service, brought down by one sentence from an actress who simply dared to say what others wouldn't. That's the power of the stage. That's the power of authenticity. And the summit stage, meant to elevate ideas and inspire dialogue, had just turned into a gladiator's arena. Now, here's the question. Did Goldie plan it? Or was it a spur-of-the-moment slip of the tongue? Was it calculated bravery or reckless honesty? That's what makes this story so irresistible. Because the fallout, as we'll see, suggests it was no accident. But in that exact moment, all that mattered was the shock. The raw, undeniable humiliation of a prince being stripped of his dignity, not by the monarchy, not by his family, but by a Hollywood star with nothing to lose. And the whispers in that room, the smirks, the sideways glances, they told Harry everything he needed to know. His credibility was in tatters. His independence questioned. His manhood mocked. But what came next would make the puppet remark look tame. Because Goldie wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. She walked onto that stage with a smile that had lit up movie screens for more than half a century. Goldie Hawn, Hollywood's eternal ray of sunshine. The actress who defied time and expectation. The woman whose laugh could disarm a room, but whose sharpness could cut through steel. Now here's the paradox. For decades, people have underestimated Goldie. They see the bubbly blonde, the quirky characters, the playful voice, and they assume she's just Hollywood glitter. But anyone who knows her story knows the truth. Behind the sparkle lies steel. Goldie is more than a performer. She's a survivor, a strategist, and a truth-teller who has never been afraid to swim against the current. And that's exactly why her words about Prince Harry carried so much weight. Let's rewind for context. Goldie Hawn isn't just a Hollywood star. She's a cultural icon. She came of age in an industry that chewed women up and spat them out the moment they hit 30. And yet, she didn't just survive, she thrived. She built her own production company in an era when women in Hollywood weren't supposed to have power. She walked away from projects that didn't align with her values. She carved out a career on her own terms, refusing to let the system dictate her destiny. Compare that to Harry. Here is a man born into privilege, wealth, and power. A man whose life was scripted from birth. And yet, for all the resources at his disposal, he has spent much of his adult life struggling to define himself. First, he was the spare. Then, the soldier. Then, the rebel prince. Now, the exiled duke. Each role thrust upon him. Each identity shifting, none of it truly his own. So when Goldie looked at Harry and branded him a puppet, it wasn't just a random jab. It was a reflection of everything she herself had fought against her entire life. Being defined by others, being boxed in, being underestimated. Goldie was the woman who cut her own strings. Harry, in her eyes, was the man who never dared. Think about the credibility that gave her. This wasn't a tabloid columnist mocking Harry from the sidelines. This was a woman who had lived the very struggle Harry claims to have endured, the battle for independence. Only difference? She won hers. He lost his. And the audience felt that. Goldie's persona is magnetic precisely because she mixes charm with candor. She'll make you laugh one second, then punch you with a hard truth the next. That duality is her power. People don't see her coming. They expect lightness, but she delivers lightning. At the summit, she embodied that balance perfectly. She began with humor, easing the crowd into her orbit. She cracked jokes about aging, about Hollywood, about herself. The laughter rolled through the audience like a wave, everyone leaning in closer, drawn to her warmth. That's the Goldie people know, the entertainer, the beloved Hollywood star. But then, slowly, she pivoted. The warmth remained, but her words sharpened. She started speaking about authenticity, about the courage to define your own path. Her tone shifted from playful to pointed. And it was in that transition that the trap was sprung. Because by the time she delivered her remark about Harry, the audience was already on her side. They were laughing with her, nodding with her, aligned with her energy. And so when she said it, they didn't recoil. They gasped, yes, but they also recognized the truth in her words. That's Goldie's genius. She doesn't attack head-on. She disarms you, then dismantles you. And Harry, sitting just feet away, never stood a chance. But here's what made it even more brutal. Goldie wasn't speaking from a place of cruelty. She wasn't heckling him. She wasn't sneering. She was delivering her truth with that same dazzling smile, the one audiences adore. That's what made it sting even more. She could humiliate you and charm you in the same breath. Let's talk about the psychology of that for a second. When someone you expect to criticize you lashes out, you brace for it. You put up walls. But when someone you respect, someone you admire, someone the world loves delivers the blow, that's when it cuts the deepest. Because it's not just an insult, it's a betrayal of expectation. And Harry felt it. You could see it in his body language. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was wounded. Now, why does Goldie's persona matter in this story? Because it amplifies the humiliation. If a politician had called Harry a puppet, it could have been dismissed as partisan. If a journalist had said it, Meghan could have spun it as media bias. But Goldie? Goldie was untouchable. She wasn't playing politics. She wasn't chasing clicks. She was a beloved figure with nothing to gain and nothing to lose. That authenticity gave her words a power that no royal press team could counteract. Think about this. Goldie Hawn has built an entire brand around joy, resilience, and independence. She has lived her life as proof that you can succeed without bowing to systems of control. And in calling Harry a puppet, she was highlighting the stark contrast between her own legacy and his. She was the woman who cut the strings. He was the man tangled in them. The audience knew it. The media knew it. And deep down, Harry knew it too. Let's be honest. There's a reason the remark went viral. It wasn't just about the insult. It was about the symbolism. Goldie Hawn represented authenticity. Prince Harry represented dependence. One embodied independence, the other, submission. It was Hollywood's golden rebel versus royalty's fallen prince. And in that moment, the rebel won. But let's take it deeper. Why did Goldie feel compelled to say it? Was it simply a joke? Or was it her way of making a larger point? Because if you listen closely to her speech, it wasn't just about Harry. It was about leadership, about courage, about refusing to let anyone else script your life. And that's the irony. That's the knife twist. Harry has spent years insisting that he left the royal family to live authentically, to speak his truth. And yet, the overwhelming perception is that he has traded one set of chains for another. He cut the strings from the monarchy only to let Meghan tie them tighter. Goldie's persona, bold and unfiltered, was the perfect foil to Harry's conflicted image. She showed the world what independence looks like, and by contrast, exposed what dependence looks like. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. Goldie Hawn didn't set out to be a cultural commentator. She's not a politician or a social activist. But her persona gives her a unique kind of credibility. She's seen as honest, authentic, real. When she speaks, people don't assume she's pushing an agenda. They assume she's speaking from the heart. And that's why her words landed with the force of a hammer. Harry's problem is that people don't believe his words anymore. They see strategy, spin, manipulation. They hear Meghan in his voice. They see rehearsed narratives instead of authenticity. Goldie exposed that contrast in one devastating blow. And the fallout was immediate. The moment the word puppet left her lips, phones lit up across the room. Tweets, clips, whispers. The narrative was already spinning out of Harry's control. And no matter what he said or did after, the damage was permanent. Because it wasn't just an insult, it was a branding. Goldie Hawn, Hollywood's eternal rebel, had stamped Harry with a label he would never escape. And that's the power of persona. Hers elevated her words into a cultural moment. His left him defenseless against them. But here's the question we need to ask next. How did Harry himself handle it in the moment? Did he laugh it off? Did he shrink? Did he dare to respond? Because the way he reacted would either soften the blow or make it worse. And unfortunately for Harry, his reaction only confirmed Goldie's point. But we'll get to that. Because what came next wasn't just a public insult. It was a visible unraveling. He walked in like a man carrying invisible chains. At first glance, Prince Harry appeared confident, his shoulders squared, his stride steady, his tailored suit cut to perfection. But if you looked closely, if you really studied him, you could see the cracks. The nervous flicker in his eyes, the tightness around his jaw, the subtle pause before each handshake, as if he were bracing for judgment with every introduction. This was not the entrance of a man at ease. This was the entrance of a man who knew the room was already against him. Think about the stakes for a second. The Concordia Summit is no ordinary event. It isn't a red carpet where charm alone can carry you. It isn't a royal ceremony where heritage commands respect. It's an arena for leaders, thinkers, movers, and shakers. Every person there has earned their place, through politics, through innovation, through grit. And then there's Harry, a man who gave up his royal role but hasn't quite carved out his own. A man caught between worlds, unsure of where he belongs. From the moment he entered, the whispers started, quiet enough not to be rude, but audible enough to sting. Some smiled politely, their eyes betraying skepticism. Others nodded with rehearsed courtesy, but quickly turned back to their conversations. The truth? He was a curiosity, not a respected equal. People were watching him not because they admired him, but because they were waiting to see if he would stumble. And Harry felt it. He scanned the room like a soldier scanning for threats. His military training still showed in his posture, but the confidence of that uniformed prince was gone. Instead, he carried the awkwardness of a man painfully aware of the narrative trailing behind him. The narrative of being Meghan's mouthpiece. The narrative of being bitter, entitled, lost. It didn't help that he was alone. No William by his side. No Charles. Not even Meghan. Just Harry, isolated, without the protective wall of family or the supportive presence of his wife. And that loneliness was glaring. In a room full of power couples and dynamic duos, Harry stood out as a solitary figure, vulnerable and exposed. Now here's where the irony kicks in. Harry has spent years insisting that stepping away from the monarchy made him freer, happier, more authentic. But that night, in that summit hall, he looked anything but free. He looked cornered, caged by perception, bound by whispers. A man who traded one set of expectations for another, and found neither liberating. As he made his way to his seat, cameras flashed, capturing every movement. His smile was polite but strained. His handshake firm but fleeting. He sat down with the kind of stiffness that betrays nerves, his body language screaming discomfort. And then, almost as if fate had scripted it, the seat he chose placed him within clear sight of the podium. The stage. The spotlight. The very place where Goldie Hawn would soon deliver her words. But before we get there, let's dissect Harry's demeanor. He fiddled with his cufflinks, adjusted his tie, shifted in his chair. These weren't the casual gestures of confidence. They were the ticks of anxiety. His eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on friendly faces, but never holding contact for long. It was as if he were searching for allies in a sea of skeptics, but finding none. Do you know that feeling when you walk into a party and realize you're the only one not in on the joke? That's what Harry radiated. Isolation wrapped in formality. And the audience could sense it. People notice these things, especially in high-stakes rooms like this. Confidence is currency, and Harry's felt counterfeit. The more he tried to project composure, the more his unease showed. And in a way, that made him even more of a target. Because here's the harsh truth. People smell weakness. They sense vulnerability. And when someone as prominent as Harry shows cracks, the world leans in closer. Waiting. Watching. Almost hoping for the fall. The irony? Harry used to command rooms. Remember his military days, when he stood tall in uniform, medals on his chest, speaking with the authority of service? Remember his youth, when his cheeky grin disarmed crowds, and his humor made him the fun prince? That Harry is gone. What remains is a man constantly on the defensive, perpetually trying to prove he's more than the puppet people believe him to be. And that's why his entrance mattered. It set the tone. The unease was palpable, the tension electric. Everyone could feel it. Harry wasn't walking into a safe space. He was walking into an ambush, whether he knew it or not. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. As Harry settled into his seat, the room buzzed with anticipation for the next speaker. And who should step onto the stage but Goldie Hawn? Her energy immediately lifted the room. She beamed, waved, cracked a quick joke, and the audience melted into laughter. In contrast, Harry sat stiff, unsmiling, eyes locked on the stage like a man awaiting judgment. The juxtaposition was brutal. Goldie exuded ease, authenticity, charisma. Harry radiated nerves, stiffness, insecurity. And the audience noticed. They couldn't help but compare. One was thriving in the spotlight. The other was shrinking in it. And Harry knew it. He leaned forward, clasped his hands, and tried to steady his breathing. Every move Goldie made, every laugh she drew, seemed to widen the gulf between them. She was the embodiment of independence. He was the embodiment of dependency. And that's when the trap began to close. Goldie hadn't said anything about him yet. She was just warming up the room. But Harry's unease magnified the tension. He looked like a man waiting to be called out. And the cruel irony? His very body language confirmed the perception she would soon voice aloud. Because when someone looks like they're hiding strings, the word puppet lands even harder. The cameras caught it all. The shifting, the fidgeting, the faint twitch of his lips as he forced a smile that never reached his eyes. The audience didn't need Goldie to say it yet. They could see it for themselves. The prince who once embodied confidence now looked like a man unraveling. And then, the unthinkable happened. Just before Goldie delivered her now infamous line, Harry's eyes darted down, his shoulders slumped ever so slightly, as though he knew. As though he could sense the words coming before anyone else. It was the calm before the storm. The uneasy silence before the punchline that wasn't funny. The moment when everyone in the room could feel that something seismic was about to happen. Harry's entrance was uneasy, yes. But it was more than that. It was prophetic. His body, his demeanor, his every movement foreshadowed what was coming. He looked like a man bracing for impact, and he was right too. Because moments later, Goldie Hawn would open her mouth and strip him of dignity in front of the world. And when the word puppet finally landed, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like confirmation. But before that line came, before the word reverberated across the room, there was a beat of silence, a collective inhale. And in that silence, Harry's unease told the whole story. He wasn't just a prince on the world stage. He was a man cornered, a man exposed, a man who knew the judgment was coming. And then it did. But how exactly did Goldie deliver it? With what tone? With what calculated precision? That's where things get even more devastating. It was the kind of silence you could hear. A silence that pressed down on the room like a weight, making every shuffle of paper, every nervous cough sound louder than it should. Goldie Hawn had just shifted her tone from playful to serious, and the audience leaned in, sensing something big was about to drop. Then it happened. 4 words. Simple, direct, brutal. Meghan Markle's puppet. The reaction was instantaneous. A sharp intake of breath swept through the hall. Some gasped audibly, hands flying to mouths. Others smirked, their eyes darting toward Harry as though they couldn't resist checking whether he'd crack. A few laughed, quiet, stifled, the kind of laughter people can't contain when truth collides with taboo. And Harry? His face told the story. The flush spread quickly across his cheeks. His jaw tightened. His eyes, wide for a split second, narrowed as though he was trying desperately to keep his composure. He shifted in his seat, straightened his posture, forced a tight-lipped smile. But it was too late. Every camera in the room was already locked on him. His humiliation was caught, magnified, broadcast. Here's the cruel irony. It wasn't just what Goldie said. It was who said it. This wasn't a royal insider, a bitter journalist, or a political rival. This was Goldie Hawn, America's sweetheart, Hollywood's golden rebel, a woman adored across generations. Her words carried the weight of authenticity. She wasn't seen as cruel. She wasn't seen as vindictive. She was seen as honest. And that's what made it sting so much. Imagine the power dynamic in that moment. A Hollywood actress on stage, smiling, radiant, unflinching. A British prince in the audience, shrinking, rattled, exposed. The reversal of roles was almost too perfect. He, born with privilege, stripped of dignity. She, who earned everything, wielding truth like a weapon. Now let's analyze the word itself. Puppet. It's devastating in its simplicity. It suggests weakness, dependency, lack of control. A puppet doesn't act, it's acted upon. It doesn't speak, it's spoken through. It doesn't lead, it follows the strings. And when Goldie attached that word to Harry, she didn't just insult him. She reduced him. She took away his agency in front of the entire world. The audience felt it. You could see it in their eyes, their body language. They weren't just reacting to the insult. They were processing its truth. Because let's be honest, wasn't this exactly the narrative people had been whispering for years? That Harry, once the cheeky rebel prince, was now little more than Meghan's echo? That every opinion, every decision, every public move carried her fingerprints? Goldie hadn't created that perception. She had crystallized it. She had put it into words so sharp, so undeniable, that no amount of royal PR could spin it away. And Harry knew it. He sat there, blinking, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though fighting back the instinct to react. Should he laugh it off? Should he glare? Should he walk out? The indecision flickered across his face, and the cameras drank it in. For a man trained to perform composure in public, the crack was obvious. But here's what made the moment cinematic. Goldie didn't stop. She let the remark hang in the air, soaking in the tension, before she moved on. She didn't backpedal. She didn't soften the blow. She transitioned seamlessly into her larger point about authenticity, independence, and leadership. To her, Harry wasn't even the focus. He was the example. A living, breathing illustration of what happens when you let someone else write your script. That's what made it devastating. Goldie hadn't targeted him with cruelty. She had used him to make a larger point, and in doing so, she made his humiliation public, permanent, and symbolic. The ripple effect was immediate. Phones lit up across the audience. Journalists scribbled frantically in their notepads. Social media managers fired off quick posts. Clips were uploaded before Goldie even finished her speech. The word puppet was already trending online, and Harry was powerless to stop it. Now, ask yourself this. What would sting more, an insult meant to hurt you, or an observation so truthful it doesn't even need to be argued? Because that's what Harry faced. He couldn't fight it because deep down, he knew millions agreed. The psychology of the moment is brutal. For years, Harry has fought to present himself as independent. From stepping back from royal duties to writing his memoir, from interviews to public speeches, his message has always been the same. I am my own man. And yet, one line from Goldie Hawn collapsed that narrative in an instant. The irony? Meghan wasn't even there. She didn't have to be. Her absence only amplified the perception that she was pulling strings from afar, her influence looming over Harry like a shadow he couldn't escape. The audience could almost see the invisible strings, tugging at his posture, his silence, his tight smile. And here's where Goldie's brilliance shines through. She didn't just insult Harry, she framed him. She positioned him not as a prince, not as a leader, but as a cautionary tale. She turned him into a metaphor. In a summit dedicated to leadership and authenticity, Harry became the example of what not to be. The media would eat it alive. Headlines like "Hollywood Queen Humiliates Royal Puppet" practically wrote themselves. Late-night comedians would loop the clip endlessly, adding their own punchlines. And in every corner of the internet, the word puppet would be attached to Harry's name like a scarlet letter. But in that moment, sitting in the audience, Harry wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about survival. Every instinct told him to disappear, to sink into his chair and vanish from sight. But there was no escape. The spotlight had found him, and Goldie's words ensured it would not let go. His reaction mattered. The world was watching, and every twitch, every flicker of discomfort, confirmed the very label he wanted to deny. Think about the cruelty of it. If Harry had laughed, people would say he was nervous. If he stayed stone-faced, people would say he was humiliated. If he walked out, people would say he was weak. No matter what he did, the puppet remark stuck. The trap was perfect. And the worst part? Goldie didn't need to repeat it. She only said it once. Once was enough. Because once the word was out there, it couldn't be taken back. Now here's where the cliffhanger begins. The audience's reaction was electric, but one reaction in particular stood out. Someone in the crowd, someone seated just a few rows away from Harry, reacted in a way that made the humiliation even sharper. A reaction that cameras would later catch, zoom in on, and circulate. That reaction would make the story explode beyond the summit walls. But we'll get to that. Because as devastating as Goldie's words were, the fallout from that single reaction would take Harry's humiliation to an entirely new level. And no one, least of all Harry, saw it coming. The moment the word puppet fell from Goldie Hawn's lips, the audience became part of the story. It wasn't just Goldie versus Harry anymore. It was the collective reaction of hundreds of eyes, faces, and body movements that told the tale. If Goldie's words were the match, the audience's response was the explosion. The first wave was shock. Gasps rippled across the hall, sharp enough to cut the air. It wasn't polite surprise. It was genuine, wide-eyed disbelief. You could almost hear people thinking, did she really just say that? Some froze in place, hands half-clasped, wine glasses trembling slightly in their grip. Others instinctively glanced at the person beside them, their eyebrows raised in silent communication. No one wanted to be the first to laugh, but everyone knew the line had landed. Then came the second wave, suppressed laughter. It started in corners, the kind of nervous chuckles people try to smother behind polite hands. But once one or two broke, the dam cracked. Smirks spread across the room. You could see shoulders shaking as people tried to contain themselves. It wasn't cruelty. It was the recognition of a truth delivered so bluntly it became absurd. The third wave was the most devastating of all, the whispers. Quick, hushed, almost gleeful. They darted through the crowd like sparks through dry grass. She said, "Puppet. That's about Megan." Harry looks furious. Each whisper fed the next, creating a chorus of quiet mockery that hung in the air even louder than the gasps had. Now let's zoom in. Certain faces told the story better than words ever could. On one side of the room, a cluster of business executives leaned toward each other, their lips curling into knowing smiles. They weren't laughing loudly, but their expressions betrayed them. This was entertainment, and they were enjoying every second. Across the aisle, a few dignitaries exchanged stiff, uncomfortable glances. For them, this was dangerous territory. An actress calling out a royal in public was a breach of decorum, even if it was true. You could almost see them calculating. Should they clap? Should they stay silent? Or should they pretend they hadn't heard? But the most powerful reaction came from someone seated just a few rows ahead of Harry. The cameras caught it. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at their lips. It wasn't a laugh, not even a smirk. It was a knowing expression, the kind that says, "She just said what we've all been thinking." That one reaction, magnified by the lens, would later go viral. It wasn't Goldie's words alone that fueled the headlines. It was the visible confirmation that people in the room agreed. And Harry saw it. He couldn't unsee it. Every whispered chuckle, every sideways glance, every smirk, it all magnified the sting. He wasn't just being called a puppet. He was being watched as people silently agreed. His body betrayed him. His posture stiffened, then slouched, then stiffened again as though he couldn't decide whether to hide or fight back. He forced a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. His fingers tapped nervously against his thigh, the rhythm betraying his inner panic. At one point, he shifted in his seat, as if to leave, but then froze, realizing that walking out would only confirm the insult. He was trapped, caught between dignity and defeat. The whispers grew louder. Someone near the back chuckled openly. Someone else shook their head with exaggerated disbelief. And all the while, Harry sat frozen, a man on display, every second of his discomfort amplified by the collective gaze of the room. Now here's where the cruelty of crowd psychology kicks in. In moments like this, people don't just react individually. They feed off each other. The more one person smirks, the easier it is for the next to laugh. The more whispers circulate, the more emboldened people become. And Harry, sitting at the center of it all, was the unwilling focal point of their shared amusement. But let's not forget the cameras. Every reaction, every laugh, every smirk was being captured. Angled shots showed Goldie's confident smile juxtaposed with Harry's strained one. Wide shots revealed clusters of attendees leaning toward one another, whispering behind their hands. And close-ups caught those fleeting expressions, the smirk, the raised eyebrow, the barely suppressed laugh, that would later flood social media with memes and commentary. The cruelest part? Harry wasn't just humiliated in the room. He was humiliated in real time, broadcast to the world. Now let's pause and ask, what does an audience's reaction really mean? It means validation. Goldie's words weren't just a lone statement. They were endorsed by the room's response. Every gasp, every chuckle, every whisper confirmed to Harry that the narrative was real. He wasn't just being called Megan's puppet. He was being seen as one. Think about how devastating that is. It's one thing to be insulted by an individual. It's another to have a room full of influential figures silently agree. That's what broke Harry that night. And here's the kicker. It didn't stop when Goldie moved on. The energy lingered. Even as she continued her speech about authenticity and leadership, the word puppet echoed in the audience's minds. People glanced at Harry throughout, their expressions shifting between sympathy and smug satisfaction. He could feel it, the word chasing him, haunting him, clinging to him like a shadow. The irony? This wasn't the first time Harry had been mocked publicly. But this was different. This wasn't paparazzi heckling him on a street corner. This wasn't anonymous online trolls. This was a room full of power brokers, cultural icons, and global leaders, the very people Harry wanted to impress. And they weren't impressed. They were entertained. The humiliation was complete. But the fallout was just beginning. Because once the audience's reaction hit the internet, the story would take on a life of its own. Clips of smirking faces, close-ups of Harry's expression, replays of Goldie's smile. The narrative wasn't just Goldie calling Harry a puppet. It was the world agreeing. And one particular reaction, that faint smile caught on camera just rows ahead of Harry, would ignite a firestorm. People would speculate endlessly about who it was, what it meant, and whether it was proof that even Harry's allies saw the truth. But that's the story for the next chapter. Because if Goldie's words were the match, and the audience's reaction was the explosion, the Meghan factor was the gasoline waiting to ignite the fire. And that fire was about to burn hotter than Harry could ever imagine. She wasn't there. She didn't need to be. That was the cruel genius of it all. Meghan Markle's absence at the Concordia Summit didn't make her irrelevant. It made her inevitable. She hovered over the entire room like a ghost no one could see, but everyone could feel. When Goldie Hawn called Harry a puppet, no one wondered who the puppeteer was. They knew. The name was unspoken, yet it echoed through every whisper, every smirk, every stolen glance. Meghan. And that's the tragedy of Harry's position. Even when Meghan is not physically present, she dominates the narrative. Her shadow stretches longer than his presence. His every word, every movement, every silence is filtered through the lens of her influence. He cannot escape her, because the world will not let him. Now, let's talk about perception. For years, critics have said Meghan is the architect of Harry's downfall, that she orchestrated Megxit, that she wrote the script for the Oprah interview, that she guided every frame of their Netflix docuseries, that she pushed him to write his memoir, Spare, and stuffed it with grievances that sounded less like Harry and more like her voice in disguise. True or not, that perception has hardened into something close to fact in the minds of millions. And when Goldie called Harry a puppet, she wasn't just insulting him. She was giving shape to that perception. The audience didn't gasp because the word was cruel. They gasped because it was familiar. It was the label they'd whispered, the meme they'd laughed at, the suspicion they'd entertained. Goldie didn't invent the Meghan factor. She exposed it, crystallized it, weaponized it in a way Harry couldn't fight. Harry's body language betrayed it too. Sitting alone, without Meghan at his side, he looked smaller, weaker, incomplete. And that's the irony. Her presence has become his armor. Without her, he looks vulnerable. But with her, he looks controlled. Either way, he loses. Let's rewind for a moment. Meghan built her identity on breaking molds. The actress who fought for roles beyond stereotypes. The woman who married into the monarchy and promised to modernize it. The duchess who walked away from the palace to chart her own path. To her supporters, she is strength incarnate. To her critics, she is a manipulator who cloaks ambition in the language of victimhood. And where does that leave Harry? In the eyes of many, Meghan is the star, and Harry is the supporting role. She's the strategist, the driver, the mastermind. He's the face, the name, the man who lends her legitimacy. Every decision they've made as a couple has been seen through that dynamic. Meghan is the leader. Harry is the follower. Meghan is the voice. Harry is the echo. That's why Goldie's words landed so hard. Because they didn't just humiliate Harry, they elevated Meghan's role in his downfall. She wasn't there, but she didn't need to defend herself. The insult wasn't aimed at her directly. It was aimed at him. Yet it was her power, her influence, her control that made it sting. Now let's dig into the psychology of it. Harry has spent years insisting that his choices are his own, that stepping back from royal duties was his decision, that speaking out against his family was his truth, that every book, every documentary, every interview reflects his voice. But the Meghan factor undermines all of it. The more he insists he's independent, the more people see Meghan's fingerprints all over his words. The harder he tries to prove himself, the more he looks like he's performing a script she wrote. That's the paradox he can't escape. He wants to be seen as authentic, but authenticity requires separation, and he can't separate from Meghan. Not personally, not publicly, not politically. His entire identity has fused with hers. To praise Harry is to praise Meghan. To mock Harry is to mock Meghan. To call him a puppet is to call her the puppeteer. And that's exactly what happened in that room. Goldie didn't need to mention Meghan by name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. The word puppet instantly drew the invisible outline of Meghan standing behind him, tugging the strings, orchestrating his every move. Look at the way the audience reacted. The smirks weren't just about Harry. They were about Meghan too. The whispers weren't just mocking him. They were dissecting her. She controls him. He can't think for himself. She's running the show. It was as much her humiliation as it was his, except she wasn't there to absorb it. He was. Harry became the lightning rod for the criticism aimed at both of them. Now, consider the cultural clash at play. Meghan comes from Hollywood, where reinvention is celebrated, where authenticity is packaged and sold like a brand. The monarchy comes from centuries of tradition, where reinvention is dangerous and roles are assigned at birth. Meghan brought Hollywood's playbook into the palace, and when it clashed, Harry chose Hollywood over heritage. To some, that was brave. To others, it was betrayal. But whichever way you slice it, it positioned Meghan as the strategist and Harry as the follower. So when Goldie, a Hollywood veteran who carved her independence without being anyone's puppet, called Harry exactly that, it was more than an insult. It was a rebuke. It was Hollywood telling Harry, "You got it wrong. You let the industry define you instead of defining yourself." And the room agreed. Harry's face told the whole story. You could almost see the thoughts racing through his mind. Meghan wasn't there, but he knew she'd hear about it within minutes. He knew the clip would go viral, that her name would be dragged into the headlines, that she'd be blamed for his humiliation. And perhaps worst of all, he knew she'd expect him to defend her and himself. But how do you defend yourself when the insult confirms what people already believe? Here's the tragedy. Meghan wasn't on stage, but her influence was. Goldie's words weren't just about Harry. They were about the power dynamic between them. And in calling him a puppet, she confirmed Meghan's dominance in the eyes of the world. But the Meghan factor didn't stop there. Because the moment the word puppet hit the internet, Meghan's name exploded alongside it. Hashtags pairing her name with control, strings, puppet master flooded Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Clips of her previous interviews were spliced with Goldie's remark, creating brutal montages that painted her as the ventriloquist and Harry as the dummy. The story wasn't just Harry's humiliation, it was Meghan's reign of control. And Meghan knows how to fight back. She's a master of narrative. She knows how to pivot, how to spin, how to reclaim control of the story. But in this case, the damage was instant, overwhelming, and unspinnable. Goldie Hawn wasn't a tabloid. She wasn't a disgruntled royal aide. She wasn't even a political opponent. She was a beloved cultural figure with nothing to gain. That authenticity made her words untouchable. Meghan couldn't dismiss them as bias. She couldn't paint Goldie as cruel. Goldie had smiled, laughed, and delivered the truth like it was common sense. That made it lethal. Harry sat there, bearing the weight of Meghan's shadow. Every glance from the audience reminded him of her. Every whisper confirmed her presence. Every camera angle framed him not as a man, but as a symbol of her control. And that's the Meghan factor. It's not just influence. It's omnipresence. Even when she's absent, she dominates the stage. But here's the cliffhanger. Goldie wasn't done. Her puppet remark was just the spark. What came next would weave Meghan even deeper into the narrative, exposing Harry not only as dependent, but as complicit. Because Goldie had more to say, not just about Harry, but about what it means to lead, to be independent, to cut the strings. And in that next part of her speech, she would make the contrast even sharper. Sharper than Harry, or Meghan, could have ever prepared for. If the word puppet was the spark, what followed was the wildfire. Goldie Hawn could have stopped there. She could have left her remark dangling in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled, allowing the room to wrestle with its meaning. But Goldie isn't the type to drop a line and retreat. She thrives in momentum. She senses the room, feeds on its tension, and then drives her point home until no one dares forget it. And so, with Harry sitting frozen in his chair, the cameras fixed on his strained expression, Goldie leaned in. Her voice softened at first, calm and conversational, but the words were razor-sharp. Leadership, she said, is not about titles. It's not about privilege. It's not even about opportunity. Leadership is about authenticity. It's about standing on your own 2 feet, no matter who's pulling at you. Because if you can't stand without strings, you can't stand at all. The words hit like a second blow. No one needed her to say Harry's name again. The context was obvious. The audience didn't hear a generic statement about leadership. They heard Goldie dismantling the very image Harry had tried to build since leaving the royal family. Think about the irony. Harry has spent years telling the world that leaving the monarchy was his act of independence, that cutting ties with his family was him standing on his own. And yet here was Goldie, declaring in front of global leaders that true independence isn't about breaking away. It's about standing strong without being propped up. And in the audience, Harry looked like the living contradiction. The crowd reacted differently this time. No gasps, no suppressed chuckles. This wasn't humor anymore. This was philosophy. Gravitas. People nodded slowly. Some even applauded. Goldie wasn't joking now. She was preaching, and the audience was listening. And that was the most humiliating part. Because in turning Harry into a case study, she made the audience complicit. They weren't just witnesses to his humiliation. They were students in her lecture, nodding in agreement that yes, this is what happens when you surrender your independence. Harry squirmed. He tried to maintain his composure, but the discomfort radiated off him like heat waves. Every nod, every clap, every murmur of agreement in the room cut deeper than the word puppet ever could. Because now it wasn't just about ridicule, it was about truth. Goldie continued, her tone rising with passion. I've been in this business for decades, she said. I've seen the way people try to control you. Studios, directors, managers, they'll all try to pull your strings. And I had to make a choice. Either I let them move me like a doll, or I cut the strings and decide for myself. And let me tell you, cutting those strings was the hardest, scariest thing I ever did. But it was the only way to become free. Again, no one needed her to point directly at Harry. The implication was devastating. Goldie was painting herself as the embodiment of independence, and Harry as the embodiment of surrender. She had cut her strings. He was tangled in his. The room hung on her words. Even those who felt sympathy for Harry couldn't deny the power of her truth. It wasn't just an actress making a speech. It was a woman who had survived the brutality of Hollywood, standing tall, declaring that freedom is only real when it's earned. Harry shifted again, this time biting his lip. His jaw flexed, his eyes downcast. If he'd hoped to weather the storm by sitting stoically, it wasn't working. Every attempt at composure only highlighted his vulnerability. His silence screamed louder than words. But Goldie wasn't finished. She smiled, warmly, almost disarmingly, and twisted the knife. You know what I've learned about strings? She asked the crowd. The longer you let someone pull them, the weaker you become. You forget how to move on your own. And eventually, you don't even realize the strings are there. You call it love. You call it loyalty. You call it destiny. But the truth is, it's control. And control isn't freedom. It was brutal. Because what has Harry said over and over about Meghan? That she saved him. That she gave him freedom. That she gave him the love he longed for. And yet, in Goldie's framing, that love became strings. That freedom became control. That destiny became dependency. The audience erupted into applause. Not thunderous, but sustained, affirming. And Harry sat there, clapping weakly along, knowing full well the applause was a verdict against him. Now, let's talk about the genius of Goldie's delivery. She never lost her charm. Her voice never grew harsh. She wasn't sneering or mocking. She was smiling, engaging, drawing people in with the same charisma that made her a star. That's what made her critique lethal. Because she didn't look like she was attacking Harry. She looked like she was teaching a lesson. And no one dares argue with a lesson that feels true. Harry was powerless. If he spoke up, he'd look defensive. If he stayed silent, he looked complicit. Every option was a trap, and the cameras captured all of it. His forced claps, his downward gaze, his faint smile that couldn't disguise the pain. Meanwhile, Goldie pressed on. The world doesn't need puppets, she declared. It needs leaders. It needs people brave enough to speak their truth without someone whispering in their ear, without someone writing their lines. Because let's be honest, if your words aren't your own, then neither is your soul. That line broke the room. The applause grew louder, scattered cheers punctuating it. It was a standing ovation moment. But Harry remained seated, swallowed in the irony of it all. Because the world has questioned his words for years. Were they his? Or were they Meghan's? And now, in the space of 5 minutes, Goldie had given the world its answer. Let's be clear. Goldie Hawn wasn't just speaking about Harry. She was speaking about authenticity as a whole. But Harry was the living, breathing example sitting in plain sight. Every word she spoke ricocheted off him, landing harder because he embodied the very weakness she was describing. And the cameras knew it. The close-ups weren't on Goldie, they were on Harry. His every blink, every swallow, every forced smile became the visual counterpoint to her words. She was the leader. He was the puppet. But the most devastating moment came at the end of her critique. She paused, smiled softly, and said, "And here's the thing about strings. They only control you if you let them. At any moment, you can cut them. At any moment, you can choose freedom. But you've got to want it. And that's the hardest part." The audience burst into applause again, and the cameras panned directly to Harry. The unspoken question was written across every face in the room. Will he ever cut his strings?